Good afternoon and welcome back to our Reentry Summit, working together to support San Franciscans after incarceration. And I'd like to send out a special thanks to the San Francisco Safe Communities Reentry Council and all the hardworking staff and volunteers who are helping out behind the scenes, pulling today's summit together. I'm Joanne Marr, and I'll be moderating our next panel discussion, At Home and in the Community, Decreasing the Disproportionate Impacts of Violence and Incarceration. We'll be discussing strategies for discouraging ex-offenders from recidivating and for providing assistance for children coming from incarcerated families. And we'll also talk about how to protect families and communities from the impacts of violence and incarceration. Let me introduce our next group of distinguished panelists. Therese Rodriguez and Kyle Sporleader are both with the organization Project What with Community Works. Corinne Pope is a parent-client with Children of Incarcerated Parents, which is run by the Office of the Public Defender. Rudy Aguilar is the program coordinator with the Parolee Services Network under the San Francisco Department of Public Health. Ronald Sanders is a community health educator with the Transitions Clinic. Kenneth Rogers is counselor with the Senior Ex-Offender Program. Cedric Akbar is executive director with Positive Directions Equals Change and the No Violence Alliance. Abdul Aziz is an ex-offender, and he's gone through the No Violence Alliance program. And George Durand is program coordinator with the Communities Program, the San Francisco Sheriff's Department, and he's also associated with NOVA, No Violence Alliance. We're going to begin this session by talking about children who come from incarcerated families and the challenges of growing up with a parent in prison. And Kyle Sporleader and Therese Rodriguez, you both grew up with parents in prison, and you belong to the organization Project What with Community Works. Why don't we begin by having you tell us, what is Project What?
Project What is a project.
No, not yet. Okay, go ahead. Is it working?
Dead mic?
We're working on it. I think your mic is working.
Okay, so my mic is working. Project What is an organization. It's made up of youth and children who have or have had parents who are incarcerated, and we do presentations a lot of times to teachers and social workers to talk about the impacts of having a parent incarcerated. One of our goals is to change policies, create awareness, and tell our stories as well.
Okay, well, growing up without one or both parents is always difficult, but it's especially difficult for children when a parent is incarcerated because state prisons are in remote locations of the state and are usually hundreds of miles away from families. So Kyle, Therese, I'd like to have each of you talk about your personal stories growing up with a parent in prison. Why don't we start with you, Therese?
So I'm going to share with everyone part of my story. I can recall vividly nights when my dad, brother, and I were home watching movies, and my dad would say those little words that started my heart racing with fear. I'm going to the store. I'll be right back. I knew from experience that once he left, chances were he wouldn't come back. I would cry and beg him, Daddy, don't go. If you really love me, you won't leave. You don't have to go. But he always left. Then would come that dreaded phone call saying how sorry he was that he wouldn't be around for a while. My dad had an addiction to crack and cocaine that was stronger than me and my family. He was in and out of jail and prison for all my childhood and up until I was around 16 years old, which at that point he made his home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he last did time at. When I was a little girl and he would disappear, my mom would tell me he was working in the fields, I think she would say, and he couldn't come home. The thought that lingered in my mind was, why didn't he know and tell us ahead of time if he'd be a while working? It was my cousin or friend of the family who eventually told me, you know, your dad's not really working right. They're just lying to you. He's really in jail. I listened more closely to phone call conversations my mom was having with my dad and other people, and I figured it out for myself. For a while, I still played along because I didn't know how to bring it up, but it eventually came out in the open. That's when my family started to really talk bad about my dad. My grandparents, uncles, and aunts on my mom's side would say, he's not your dad. He's not helping you. He's not doing anything for you. He doesn't help your mom. Look where he's at. He's more like your dad, they would say, referring to my grandpa and uncle. My brother and I were raised not to talk back to our elders, but everything they said to me or anyone else about my dad got me angry and built resentment towards them. My dad was my everything, my shining star. I was the firstborn, daddy's little girl. No matter how much he hurt me and my family, he was still my dad, and I didn't like when anyone would say otherwise. In my head, I defended my father. My brother and I never visited my dad when he was locked up. I'm not sure if it was my mom's or dad's idea for us not to go, but we never questioned why we didn't visit him. I guess I always assumed he was just far away. I remember feeling stressed out because it was very hard to write him. He would send us birthday cards, letters, and drawings of cartoons. I loved receiving these drawings. I knew he was an artist, and I felt proud of that. On the other hand, I never really sent him anything. On the phone, he'd ask if we'd written or sent him anything, and I would lie and say that I would. I'd say something like it got lost in the mail. When he would come back home from being locked up, he'd be in a good mood at first, but the anxiety would build up in me. I knew that we'd get whipped later, and only a matter of time for all those lies we had told him. I'm sure it really hurt that we never wrote him a letter or sent him anything, but there was nothing I had to say to him. Each time my dad went away, it grew more and more painful for me to be without my dad, and each time apart grew longer. When I was in the 4th grade, my parents finally got divorced. My dad was sent to Milwaukee, and when he was released for the final time, he decided to stay out there, believing that he needed to get away from his old lifestyle and bad habits in the city. He came back to visit us and apologized for everything he did and asked for our forgiveness. At the time, I really couldn't respond and express how I felt. I just hugged him as he cried and told him that it was okay. His other intention in coming down was to see if we wanted to move up to Milwaukee with him, but none of us was ready to change our lives around to fit his new lifestyle. We visited him before making our final decision to stay in San Francisco, where we really felt was our home. I was hurt in the end. He chose to live out there without us. I guess I had always assumed that he would eventually come back and make up for lost time. Then I figured it wouldn't make that big of a difference since I was used to him not being around anyways. He's now married and is taking care of my niece, my stepmom's daughter, while my sister is in prison. I have my own family now, a husband, and a beautiful baby boy. My experiences growing up motivate me to try very hard with my marriage. I put a lot into it and make sure that he is as well. I would never want to put my son through such horrible experiences as an absent father, divorce, or watching his parents date other people. I want to be there physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually for my son so that he has what I missed out on. I want to give my son the love, consistency, stability, and trust so that he can grow up knowing that he is loved. But I also want him to be independent as I learned to be. These are some of the reasons why I chose to become a social worker. I'm now in the last year of the master's program at State. A lot of people who need services A lot of the people who do need services are from low-income neighborhoods and struggling families. These experiences have helped me to grow into a very strong and independent person. My desire and passion is to help people, especially children, youth, and families who have many hardships and barriers in their life. Sometimes people go to college just to focus on making money, getting a better job, and moving out of their neighborhood. Not me. I'm working and educating myself so that I can use my skills to help advocate for people, change policies, and organize.